In this video, I'll be explaining the important relationship between the treble and bass clefs and detailing why we have different clefs. It's really important that you can recognise notes on both the treble and bass clefs before watching this video. If you need to, have a look at my other videos on the treble and bass clef first before watching this one. Okay, I can't emphasise the importance of middle C enough. It's very easy to think of the treble and bass clefs as two completely unrelated symbols. The treble clef used for high pitches or sounds, with the bass clef used for low pitches or sounds. This video is designed so that you can clearly see the important relationship between the two clefs. Here's middle C in the treble clef. Here's middle C in the bass clef. They look very different. In the treble clef, the note is below the stave, whereas in the bass clef, the note is above the stave. However, they are, in fact, the very same note. I'll just rearrange these notes so that they would appear in some piano music, and if a pianist were to play it, although there are two notes, because they are the same note, the pianist would actually only end up playing one note, middle C. So why do we have two clefs to represent the same thing? Well, I'm just going to move both the bass and treble clefs rather close to each other so that the middle C on each clef overlaps. Both notes share the same ledger line, which I've highlighted red. The note sits immediately between the two clefs or in the middle of both clefs, hence middle C. It's very important that you remember this middle C as it will help us understand the relationship between the two clefs. Now, it's not just middle C which is the same pitch on each clef. This is just a helpful starting note to help us calculate other note relations. Here's the D on the treble clef. Here is D next to middle C in bass clef. You'll see in both clefs it is just one step up from middle C. Therefore, the D in treble clef is the same pitch as this D in the bass clef. Let's keep going. Here's an E and its same pitch in bass clef. Notice how the second ledger line, highlighted red, replaces the bottom line of the treble clef. We can keep this pattern going. Here's F and F in bass clef, and so on. The higher we go, the more ledger lines we have to add to the bass clef notes. Now, I earlier asked why we have different clefs to represent the same notes. Well, here's part of the reason. Treble clef shows higher notes than bass clef, so rather than writing a passage like this, where all the ledger lines make it rather confusing, using the treble clef removes the clutter of the ledger lines. The same is true for notes below middle C. Here's our middle C in treble clef, and next to it let's add the note B. It is one step down from the middle C and sits underneath the ledger line. The B in the bass clef is also going to sit one step lower than middle C, but it doesn't need a ledger line as it sits neatly on top of the stave. So, looking at the bottom of the screen, we now know that these two notes are exactly the same pitch. Let's keep descending note-wise. This is an A on the bass clef, and it sits with the top line of the bass clef stave cutting right through it. Let's look at the link between the two staves. And if we remove the bass clef, we can see that the A on the treble clef has to have another ledger line to represent the top line of the bass clef. Now, we could keep going as low down the stave as we wished. The lower you go with the treble clef, the more ledger lines you have to add. But the bass clef removes the need for ledger lines. The key point to remember is that important link between the staves, the middle C. Always refer back to middle C if you need to. You may have wondered why instruments sometimes use bass clef, whereas others use treble clef. And there are other clefs for other instruments. Have a look at my videos on the tenor and alto clefs if you're interested. In a nutshell, an instrument that is low in pitch uses the bass clef, whereas higher sounding instruments use the treble clef. The piano uses both clefs not because you play one clef with each hand, but because the left hand is usually playing the lower notes and is written in the bass clef, whereas the right hand is usually playing the higher notes and accordingly is written in the treble clef. Some instruments like the French horn and bassoon play pitches that often sit in the middle of the treble and bass clefs. These instruments often have music which changes clef halfway through to avoid the use of lots of ledger lines. I'm hoping that by now you're feeling much more confident with the relationship between the two clefs. It's quite common for music theory exam papers to include a question such as this. Rewrite the following passage in the bass clef, but ensure to keep the pitches the same. Now this is where a common mistake occurs. Many students will write this as their answer, as they both start on a D and each melody moves in the same direction, up to the next note, down to the next, and so on. But what they've written is one octave too low. This student forgot to match up the middle C. Let's just move this incorrect answer to the bottom of the screen. If we overlay a correct answer, you'll see that at the end of bar 1, where there is a middle C, we can work out all of the surrounding notes one by one. So this is our correct answer. Look how different it is to the incorrect answer at the bottom of the screen. Do be careful on questions like this. The link to middle C will always help you calculate the correct answer. Therefore, do make sure you remember middle C on both the treble and bass clefs. I do hope that this video has been useful to you. Thanks for watching.